I started in high school and college in retail sales. And I sold everything. I sold men's clothing. I sold women's clothing. I sold makeup. I loved being on commission, even working part-time because it meant I made more money than I did in my very first job, which was being a waitress, which now decided I didn't want to do that for a living. And then I worked co-op at General Motors every year for the 4 years I was in college. So I worked full-time at GM in the summers and part-time during the breaks. And so I did, and I worked in the sales department, but I also worked in other departments. But what I realized I loved about sales was the interaction with people. And I started learning about that in retail. And then when I graduated from college, GM hired me full time, GM Park Division. They sent me to West Texas. Ooh. A female had never done that job before. It was all men who had been at the company for at least 15 to 20 years and worked their way up to that job. So then I got to interact with car dealers in West Texas, and I have a funny story I'll share with you later. So I started selling to car dealers to get them to buy their parts from General Motors versus Pete's parts store down the street. And then ultimately, through an interesting way, I got it to Digital Equipment Corporation in 1980, and I started my 40-plus year tenure in technology. Wow. And when I made the shift into technology, the one interesting thing I had to kind of pivot on was, how do I connect with technical buyers? Because back in the 80s, we always sold to technical buyers. Yeah. You didn't sell to a CIO. You didn't sell. There wasn't a head of IT. It was technical buyers. And so that was the pivot for me, was how to sell to technical buyers.
Was that mini computers?
Well, minis, and they had DEC System 10s and 20s. We had Maxes. We had, I don't know, 12 different kinds of PDP 11s. We had 14 operating systems. Yeah. And when they hired me at Digital, they had previously only hired engineers to be their salespeople. Then they decided they would run an experiment. Could we hire non-engineers to sell? And I was in their first round of experiments. Today's PCs, they could do one thing. In my General Motors job, I was the only female of all the district managers. My territory was like the majority of West Texas. Everybody else was a man who'd worked for GM for 15 to 20 years. When we'd meet in Dallas every month, they would go play golf. I did not play golf. I'd go to the spa, and then they would play poker all night. So I was literally the only female there. Now, when I first went to Digital, there was one female sales manager and one female sales rep. And the rep, I remember, Beth sold into state and local education. And then there was a female sales manager. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. I was thrilled. Of course, all the rest were men. And I was at DEC for 14 years. I'll say two things about being the only female. I was really glad in the Austin office that there was the other two females, because they kind of took me under their wing. But I was so lucky to have an ongoing suite of incredibly supportive leaders who were men. They really sponsored me, which was very unusual back then. I consider myself super lucky that I had that kind of mentorship and sponsorship. The other thing that Jeff did back in the early days was massive amounts of training. My first month, I was in Worcester, Mass in January for a month-long onboarding and training. And that continued throughout my 14 years. Like, I went to a 2-week Harvard mini MBA. I think I did every sales training course that has been invented when I was there. So they made a really big investment in me. And then I had male leaders that supported and elevated me and kind of taught me the ropes. And so it was weird at GM because I was literally the only female in the room every single time. At DEC, it was different, but then I got such a different level of support and engagement and investment. It was really amazing.
Yeah, and maybe because tech was kind of like the Wild West. I mean, nobody knew everything. Sounds good.
No, it was very much like everybody was there to help each other kind of thing.
So what do you love about sales, or what did you love at the time? And
it's such a long life story. I'm trying to pick my favorites. Okay, I love the energy of sales organizations. I love the optimism of sales organizations because, frankly, we always believe we can do anything because we're in sales, right? We can sell anybody. We can make any quota, right? We can learn any new product. I really, particularly as I move through my career, I love the concept of delivering solutions to customers and partners that would enable them and their business to be successful. I think in sales, it's, of all the functions, It's the place where you have the most team building and team bonding because of what we all do together in a shared way in sales. Sales celebrates success better than any other function. I have been lucky to win 30 different sales contests, sales events, or be a senior leader and host the event. We traveled the world. We got to celebrate. Those people became personal friends. We knew everybody's spouses. And I just have pictures in my head, like if you get a bunch of chief financial officers together at their celebration events, quite as fun as the sales ones. Not. Um, and, the other thing I love about sales is no matter what your company does for a living, if you don't have a good sales organization, you're not going to have
You got nothing. That's right.
nothing without sales. If I think about somebody new going into a sales career, I think about three things. Number one, it's really hard, but I think it's the best opportunity to advance in any company, period. Second, build a network within the company that you're going to work for because sales ultimately touches everything. It's going to touch product development and engineering. It's going to touch customer support. It's going to touch operations because the customer's invoice gets messed up or you didn't apply the right discount for your partner. So build a network within your company. And the third one is always serve as a champion for your customers and partners. Because at the end of the day, if they believe you are their champion, you will create a trusted relationship with them, which I think is critical to have a long-term sales relationship with any customer or partner. There's a saying that I'm known for, and I'll tell you that first because it ties to why I do handwritten notes. So I was lucky enough to go through lots of leadership courses, right? And there's all these, canned leadership models. But I think ultimately, particularly if you're going to start leading large teams internationally, you have to have your own style and you have to think about what kind of leader you want to be. So I created what I call leadership is personal. And personal, every one of the letters stands for something. So P is for performance, E is for energy, R is for relationships, S is for social, which has way more connotations nowadays. O is for open-minded, N is for nurturing, A is for acclaim, and L is for learning. Someday I will write a book, Lori. Each of the letters will be a chapter. So I do think leadership has to be personal because particularly in sales, because everybody's going to go, oh, she's just faking that, right? So I think it's so important to always show up as your personal and authentic self. And so as part of my personal and authentic self, I write handwritten welcome notes to everybody who ever joined my team. So when we stood inside sales up at Microsoft from scratch and hired 2,200 people in 2.5 years, every single person when they started on their first day had a handwritten note on their desk that I literally wrote. And now they were cool, and there was two sentences, but everybody got one. I always write handwritten notes when I would hand out any kind of award, like when we go on the sales celebrations and the top President's Club winners or whatever, they would find a handwritten note in their hotel room, their ship room, whatever. Birthdays, anniversaries, babies. I have a full set of customized personal stationery that I whip out and use for whatever the right occasion is. And one of the things that I love the most about my career is I still get notes or outreaches on LinkedIn from somebody who I wrote a note to like 10 years ago. And they take a picture and they show me that they framed the note and it's on their wall. And they're like, Debbie, I still look at this every day. Thank you so much. So to me, to be a really sincere leader, you have to show up as personal, and leadership is personal, includes writing handwritten notes.
Wow. I love that so much. So many different things, but I have a big drawer full of stationery myself, so I totally get that.
And Lori, I will add one little thing that we live in such a digital world now, and there's so many wonderful things I love about that. But texting somebody congratulations or dropping an email, it's not the same as a handwritten personal note. Yeah, I came in as a sales rep too. I left as the youngest female vice president. I learned a lot on what it takes to navigate through different roles. And a lot of it I learned because of those mentors I mentioned and sponsors that I mentioned earlier. Like they taught me stuff. They taught me to understand the politics of a company. They taught me which events you really never miss. They taught me, like, if you're going to make a presentation in front of your boss's boss, like, how do you prepare for that? So I think I was lucky in that I had good role models who kind of showed me the ropes along the way. So after DEC, I went to two smaller companies. And in both cases, I was either a direct to somebody who worked for the CEO or a direct to the CEO. So I never moved up, but I learned then how to operate at the next level. And operating at that level was a whole nother education, right? Because now you're reporting to senior executives who are running a company, right? And so it made me think differently about how you would promote people that work for you. Now, when I left the second smaller company, I went to Compaq and ultimately, went through the HP merger. And I had very steady advancement through larger roles there, but I really based it upon what I had learned at DEC and the two smaller companies. I I will say that of all the companies I worked for, Cisco was the very best company I ever worked for. John Chambers was the finest CEO I ever worked for. It was the place where I got the opportunity to really move up, and it was the first time I was really an executive in a big company. I started running a portion of the Americas services business. Then I got ultimately all of North America. Then John Chambers asked me to do a 2-year special project to integrate all of operations together. So I did that. And then when I finished that role, I took over all of the services sales business at Cisco, which was a $12 billion book of business, and I had reps around the world. And that was when I got promoted to senior vice president, which is the highest level at Cisco unless you're working directly for John. And so that was the one where I really learned how to navigate promotion to an executive role. And it helped that I worked at the two smaller companies directly for the CEO because I understood what was needed at that level. For all the rest of my career, I always went in. I entered as a senior executive. I was either reporting to a CEO or to someone that did report to the CEO. So I was a chief operating officer of a publicly held company. I was a corporate vice president at Microsoft. There's only about 150 of those. I was the chief commercial officer at Dropbox. And so by getting to that senior SVP level at Cisco, then I always did all my entry roles at all my other companies at the executive level. And to be honest, I didn't really want to ever be a CEO, so I was good with, one level down. We got company cars. At Digital, we called our cars deckmobiles. And our spouses were deck mates. And yeah, so had a lot of, but it was nice. For many, many years, I had a company car. Finally, when phones were invented, cell phones, Dad bought me a brick. So for those people in the audience who may not be our age, it came in a big, big, big bag that you carried over your shoulder. It was thick and it had a hard wire antenna. It would last for about 30 minutes. Then it had to be charged. And then I went from that to one of my deckmobiles finally got the phone that was wired into the car.
I have one of those.
And I was like, whoa, it's time now. It's her work. And called somebody from my firm. And so, of course, you had to hold the phone while you were driving. That was not the safest thing in the world.